My name is Anna. I work as a freelance graphic designer, so renting a desk at a co-working space was the perfect setup for me. The office was clean, modern, and filled with creative energy from other freelancers and small business owners. It was a bustling environment during the week, but the quiet weekends and late nights were my favorite times to catch up on work. The dim lighting and silence made it easier for me to focus, and I often stayed late or came in on weekends to get ahead, freeing up my midweek schedule. It was during one of these late-night sessions that I first noticed him. He was overweight, disheveled, and smelled like he hadn't bathed in days. At first, I just assumed he was another renter, maybe working on a deadline like I was. I didn't think much of it. We shared a few awkward nods when we passed each other in the kitchen, but that was the extent of our interaction. I didn't catch his name, and he never introduced himself. He always wore the same stained hoodie, and his eyes were sunken with dark circles, as if he never slept. He would show up sporadically, sometimes during the day, sometimes late at night. He never seemed to be working on anything, though. I noticed he spent most of his time just wandering around the space or sitting at his desk, staring at his phone or computer screen. One evening, I was the only one left in the office. The soft hum of my computer was the only sound breaking the silence. I was deep into a project when I heard the door creak open. I glanced up and saw him. He was just standing there, watching me from across the room. I gave him a polite smile, trying not to seem rude, and went back to work, hoping he'd leave soon. But he didn't. Instead, he shuffled closer to my desk, the smell of his body odor growing stronger. He hovered near me, awkwardly pretending to look at something on the wall. "You're always here late," he said, his voice low and grating. "Don't you get scared being all alone?" I forced a chuckle, trying to keep things light. "No, it's usually pretty quiet. I like the peace." He nodded but didn't move away. "I've noticed your car in the parking lot. You drive that blue hatchback, right?" I felt a chill run down my spine. How did he know what car I drove? I had never spoken to him about it. I laughed nervously, trying to brush off the discomfort. "Yeah, that's me. It's a good little car." He smiled, but there was something off about it. Something that made my skin crawl. "It's a cute car, just like you." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and went back to my work, hoping he would take the hint and leave. He lingered a moment longer before finally shuffling back to his desk. I could feel his eyes on me for the rest of the night, and it made me uneasy. The next day, I tried to forget about the encounter. Maybe I was overreacting, I told myself. He was just being friendly, right? But things started to get weirder. He began showing up more often, and it wasn't long before I noticed him hanging around the entrance when I arrived or left the office. He would always make a point to say something to me, usually a creepy comment about my appearance or what I was wearing. I started avoiding him, timing my arrivals and departures so I wouldn't run into him. But no matter how careful I was, he always seemed to find me. One day I was scrolling through my Instagram feed when I saw that I had a new follower. It was him. I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't given him my Instagram handle, and my profile was private. How had he found me? I immediately blocked him, but the fact that he had gone out of his way to find me online made me feel violated. The breaking point came one Saturday night. I had stayed late to finish a project, and the office was completely empty. Or so I thought. I was packing up my things when I heard the door creak open. I looked up, and there he was, standing in the doorway, a strange smile on his face. "You shouldn't block people who just want to be your friend," he said, his voice dripping with malice. My heart pounded in my chest. How did he know I had blocked him? I grabbed my bag and bolted for the door, but he stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "I just want to talk," he said, his smile widening. "Why are you in such a hurry, Anna?" I pushed past him, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the door handle. I finally managed to get it open and ran out into the hallway, not stopping until I was outside, where I called the police. The next day, I went to the management office, shaking with anger and fear. I told them everything about his creepy comments, the way he followed me, how he knew about my car and my Instagram. I demanded they do something about him. The manager looked confused. "What do you mean?" she asked. "We don't have anyone like that renting a desk here." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean? He's here all the time, like I just saw him. He's in the office right now." The manager shook her head, confused. "I'm sorry, but I don't know who you're talking about. We don't have anyone by that description renting space here. I've never seen him. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. If he wasn't a renter, then who the hell was he? How had he been getting into the building? I didn't wait to find out. I packed up my things and left that day, quitting the co-working space for good. I bought a new car and deleted all my social media profiles. I just wanted to disappear, to get away from him. A few weeks later, I started to feel a little better. I told myself it was over, that he couldn't find me now, but the fear never really went away. One afternoon, I decided to catch a movie by myself, something light and fun to take my mind off things. The theater was mostly empty, and I found a seat near the back, hoping to enjoy a quiet afternoon. Halfway through the movie, I felt a presence behind me. I turned around, my heart skipping a beat, and there he was, sitting 2 rows back, staring at me with that same unsettling smile. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. He raised his hand and gave me a little wave as if we were old friends. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I grabbed my bag and ran out of the theater, my heart pounding in my ears. As I burst into the daylight, I realized something terrifying. No matter how far I ran, no matter what I did, he would always find me.
I used to work at a small marketing firm, a tight-knit team of about 15 people. It wasn't the most exciting job, but it paid the bills, and the office environment was generally pleasant. We had the usual mix of personalities, some friendly, some reserved, and then there was him. Let's call him Mark. Mark was one of those people you couldn't quite figure out. He was polite, always smiled, and seemed to get along with everyone. But there was something off about him. Something you couldn't put your finger on. He was a little too eager to please, a little too interested in everyone's business. He had a way of slipping into conversations uninvited, always managing to steer them back to himself. He never seemed to miss a day of work, always there early, always the last to leave. It was as if the office was his whole world. At first, I didn't think much of it. We all have our quirks, right? But as the months went on, Mark's behavior started to get under my skin. He had this unnerving habit of standing just a little too close when he talked to you, his eyes boring into yours like he was trying to read your mind. He remembered everything. Details about your personal life, the exact words you'd said in passing weeks ago, things you wouldn't even remember saying yourself. It felt intrusive, but I shrugged it off, telling myself he was just trying to be friendly. Then there were the little things that didn't seem to add up. Mark was meticulous, almost obsessively so. His desk was always spotless, every paper perfectly aligned, every pen in its place. He kept a log of every call he made, every email he sent, noting the time down to the second. It was as if he was documenting his every move. But what really started to worry me was how he seemed to know things he shouldn't. He'd make comments about conversations I'd had in private with others, as if he'd been listening. Once, he mentioned an argument I'd had with my boyfriend over the phone, something I knew I hadn't discussed with anyone at work. It all came to a head one Friday afternoon. The office was quiet, most people having left early for the weekend. I was wrapping up some work when I noticed Mark standing at the far end of the room, staring at me. Not in a casual way. He was just standing there, unblinking, watching me. I tried to ignore it, but his gaze felt like it was burning into my back. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I turned around and forced a smile. "Hey Mark, everything okay?" He didn't smile back. "You don't like me, do you?" The question caught me off guard. What? No, it's not that. He cut me off, his tone flat and devoid of emotion. I've seen the way you look at me. You think I'm weird. You're afraid of me. I felt a chill run down my spine. I don't think that at all, Mark. I'm just tired. It's been a long week. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. I know what people say about me. I hear them talking behind my back. But you're different. You don't just think it. You know it. My heart was racing. I tried to laugh it off, but it came out shaky. Come on, Mark, you're just being paranoid. No one thinks that. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity, and then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the office. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. I told myself he was just having a bad day, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about Mark. His words echoed in my head, and I started to wonder if maybe I should talk to someone about it. HR maybe, or my boss. But what would I say? That he was creepy? That he made me uncomfortable? I had no proof of anything, just a gut feeling that something was wrong. Monday morning came, and I was dreading going back to the office. But when I got there, Mark wasn't at his desk. In fact, no one had seen him all morning. By lunchtime, people were starting to talk. It wasn't like Mark to miss work. He was always there, like clockwork. By the end of the day, there was still no sign of him, and I started to feel a little relieved. Maybe he'd found another job, or maybe he just needed some time off. But that relief was short-lived. As I was leaving the office, I found a note stuck to my car windshield. It was written in neat, precise handwriting. You should have been nicer to me. You won't see me, but I'll always be watching. My hands were trembling as I read the note. I looked around the parking lot, but it was empty. There was no one there, no sign of Mark, no sign of anyone. I quickly got into my car and drove home, my mind racing with fear. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak, every shadow made me jump. I locked all the doors and windows, checking them over and over again, but no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next morning, I went straight to my boss and showed him the note. He looked concerned but confused. Are you sure it was Mark? Maybe it's just a prank. No, it was him, I insisted. He knows things he shouldn't. He's been watching me, listening to my conversations. My boss nodded, but I could tell he didn't really believe me. I'll look into it, he said, but I knew nothing would come of it. Mark had vanished without a trace, and without him there, I had nothing to prove my story. Over the next few weeks, I tried to go back to my normal routine, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I started avoiding the office, working from home as much as possible. But the paranoia followed me there too. I'd hear noises in the middle of the night, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of something outside my window. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, but the fear was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. Then, one evening, I came home to find my apartment door unlocked. My heart dropped as I slowly pushed it open, my hand shaking. Everything seemed normal, nothing out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. I called the police, but there was nothing they could do. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a break-in. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard it, a faint tapping on the window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, as if someone was trying to get my attention. I didn't dare move. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, praying that it was just a tree branch or a bird, but deep down, I knew better. The next day, I packed up and moved out. I left the city, changed my phone number, deleted all my social media accounts. I needed to disappear, to get away from Mark and the terror he had brought into my life. For a while, it worked. I found a new job in a new city, and slowly the fear began to fade. But every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of someone who looked like him. A man with that same intense stare, the same unsettling smile, and the fear would come rushing back. It's been a few years now, and I've tried to put it all behind me. But every time I see a car parked too close or a figure lingering at the edge of my vision, I wonder if it's him, if he found me, and I wonder if I'll ever truly be free of the psychopath I once worked with.
When I was 22, I moved back into my childhood home for the summer. The old house by the lake had always been a refuge, a place of fond memories and peaceful solitude. Surrounded by dense woods, the nearest neighbor a mile away, the house was completely isolated. By day, the lake was serene, its waters shimmering under the sunlight, but by night, it transformed into something far more sinister. The lake became a void, a black mirror that reflected nothing but darkness, swallowing any light that dared to touch its surface. The silence at night was oppressive. Every creak of the old wooden floors echoed through the house, and the wind whistling through the trees outside sounded like distant whispers. I tried to convince myself that it was just the isolation playing tricks on my mind, but deep down, I knew something was off. The air felt heavy, charged with a tension that made my skin crawl. It was as if the house itself was alive, watching, waiting. On the fourth night, I was sitting on the porch, trying to enjoy the evening breeze. The sky was darkening, the last rays of sunlight fading over the treetops. The lake was still, too still, its surface eerily calm. As I sat there sipping on a beer, I heard it. A faint splashing sound coming from the water. At first, I dismissed it as a fish or a beaver, but the splashing grew louder, more frantic. My heart started to race, and I found myself unable to tear my eyes away from the dark water. I grabbed the flashlight I kept by the door and shone it toward the lake. The beam of light cut through the darkness, reflecting off the surface of the water. And that's when I saw it. A figure thrashing in the middle of the lake, struggling to stay afloat. My breath caught in my throat as I realized it was a person. Someone was out there, drowning. Without thinking, I ran down to the dock, shouting for them to hold on. But the figure didn't respond. It didn't even seem to notice me. Instead of swimming toward the shore, it was moving away, deeper into the lake. Panic gripped me as I reached the edge of the dock, my flashlight beam fixed on the figure. It was moving slower now, its struggles weakening, as if it was giving up. Then, something truly terrifying happened. The figure stopped moving altogether and slowly turned to face me. The beam of my flashlight caught its head, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There were no features, no eyes, no mouth, no nose, just a smooth, dark surface where a face should have been. My heart pounded in my chest as the figure began to sink, disappearing beneath the water without a sound. I stood there, frozen, staring at the spot where it had vanished. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Was it really a person? Or was it something else? Something that shouldn't exist? The thought made me shudder, and I backed away from the edge of the dock, my legs trembling. As I turned to leave, I heard something, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, carried on the wind. I stopped, straining to hear, but there was nothing, just the sound of my own ragged breathing. I told myself it was just the wind, just my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. Something was out there, something that didn't belong in this world. I ran back to the house, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked every door, every window, my hands shaking as I did. The silence inside the house was suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. I grabbed my phone, my mind racing with thoughts of calling for help. But what would I say? That I saw a faceless figure drowning in the lake? That I wasn't even sure it was human? They'd think I was insane. I spent the rest of the night pacing around the house, jumping at every little noise. My mind played tricks on me, turning every shadow into a lurking figure, every creak into a footstep. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen, but the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. The image of that featureless face was burned into my mind, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, watching me. Around midnight, the power went out. 1 minute the lights were on, and the next, the house was plunged into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands trembling as I flicked it on. The beam of light cut through the blackness, but it did little to ease the terror that was gnawing at my insides. I walked to the window, peering out into the night. The lake was just a dark, featureless void in the distance, barely visible through the trees, and then I heard it again, the splashing. This time, it was louder, closer. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly turned my head toward the lake. The sound was coming from the shore, just beyond the edge of the trees. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I approached the window, the flashlight shaking in my hand. Standing at the water's edge was the figure, its body dripping with water, its head tilted at that unnatural angle. It was staring at me, no, through me, with that blank, featureless face. My legs felt like they were made of lead, my body paralyzed with fear. The figure began to move toward the house, its movements slow and deliberate, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. A sudden bang from the back of the house made me jump. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. The sound came again, louder this time. It was coming from the basement. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I was trapped, caught between the figure outside and whatever was making that noise below. The banging stopped, replaced by a slow, deliberate creaking on the stairs. It was the sound of someone, or something, dragging itself up, one step at a time. My heart raced as the creaking grew louder, closer. I backed into the corner of the room, my flashlight beam sweeping across the walls, but there was nothing there. The air grew colder, and I could feel a presence, something dark and malevolent, filling the room. The figure from the lake was inside. I knew it, could feel it. The creaking stopped just outside the living room door, and for a moment, everything was silent. I held my breath, praying that whatever it was would go away, leave me alone. But then the door slowly creaked open, revealing the dark figure standing in the doorway. It was dripping wet, water pooling around its feet, its head tilted at that unnatural angle. It didn't move, just stood there, staring at me with that blank, featureless face. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My voice was caught in my throat, strangled by terror. The figure took a step forward, and I could hear the water squelching beneath its feet. The room grew colder, the shadows deeper, as it drew closer. I was shaking, my mind screaming at me to do something, anything. But all I could do was watch as it slowly approached. It stopped just a few feet away from me, its head tilting to the side as if it was studying me. I could feel its gaze, cold and piercing, like ice on my skin. My flashlight flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. And then, in the silence, I heard it. A whisper, soft and faint, like a voice carried on the wind. It was coming from the figure, from that featureless face. The words were garbled, indistinct, but I could make out one thing: my name. It was saying my name, over and over, like a chant, a curse. I couldn't take it anymore. With a burst of adrenaline, I bolted for the door, shoving past the figure. It didn't try to stop me, didn't move at all, just stood there, whispering my name. I ran through the house, not stopping until I was outside, gasping for breath in the cold night air. I didn't look back as I jumped into my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and I sped down the driveway, not caring where I was going, as long as it was away from that house, away from whatever was inside. I drove for what felt like hours, not stopping until I reached the nearest town. I checked into a motel, not caring about the cost, and spent the night huddled in bed, my mind racing. I couldn't stop thinking about that figure, about the way it had whispered my name, about the cold, empty eyes that had stared right through me. The next day, I called my parents and told them I was leaving. I didn't give them a reason, just packed my things and left the house for good. I sold it as quickly as I could, not caring about the money, just wanting to be rid of it. But no matter how far I run, I can't escape it. I still hear the whispers in the dark, still see that blank, featureless face in my nightmares. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I feel the cold presence of something watching me, waiting for the moment when it can come for me again.